I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation.
If you aren't learning faster than your competition, you will fall behind. However, most organizations are structured for execution, where failure is a four-letter word, psychological safety is low, fear is high, and navigating political minefields is the norm. Many organizations tolerate and fall into apathy and pretend harmony. However, organizations that encourage their employees to identify and use their intuition accelerate learning. For example, Blockbuster had the opportunity to purchase Netflix but passed, failing to learn and adapt. Similarly, senior staff at NASA ignored key engineers' hunches about a potential O-ring failure, leading to the Challenger disaster. Learning requires humility, curiosity, integrity, and courage. We need personal time off, PTO, as well as learning time off, LTO, with learning that is reinforced, practiced, and aligned to company strategy. And it's essential to apply the right kind of learning tools and not believe that one size fits all. Well, this is just a few of the things that my next guest and I talked about on this edition of the Business of Intuition. His name is Damon Lembi. Damon is a two-time best-selling author, the host of the Learnit All podcast, and CEO of Learnit, a global leader in corporate training that has upskilled over 1.8 million people. Drawing from his prior baseball career, Damon brings an athlete's perspective to leadership. Through his journey, he has gained the valuable and invaluable insights into what helps organizations grow, how great leaders learn, and why Learnit All companies outpace their competitors every time. Damon Lembi on the Business of Intuition. Damon, it's great to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to it. The topic around creating learning organizations, as people have listened to this podcast, is near and dear to my heart. I just came back about 2 weeks ago from I guess it's called the Institute of Coaching annual conference that took place at Harvard. And they had an assortment of wonderful speakers. And there was one gal that I've been studying and following for a long time named Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard Business Review publisher, and she's done a lot of studies. She's kind of become a rock star in many ways. And I remember reading an article many years ago called Why Hospitals Don't Learn from Failure. And because we have such a deep dive into the healthcare industry, I thought I should probably read this. I was fascinated by this. And I realized, which I think the reason why this article became so popular is because she was not just talking about hospitals, but the same functions around the fact that most companies are structured for execution, not for learning, apply across all industries. And so she was really talking about how do you create a learning organization. And I know that's a forte of yours. And so I want to hear what your thoughts are to get this ball rolling about how do you create, in your words, a learning factory within a company?
Well, Dean, first of all, thanks for having me here today. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you're just talking about that is I think organizations and leadership, they have to get comfortable to some level with failure, that it's okay. And to create a learning culture, a learning factory, I think it's important to, from the top down, to be willing to invest in your people. And when I say invest in your people, sure, there's a financial investment, but a big part of it as well is time, giving them the time and space and opportunity to learn. So setting up situations where they can go and they can do training or they can do coaching. And during work time, for instance, everybody has PTO, paid time off. I like to recommend to our customers to have LTO, learning time off, so that they have specific time during the day, during the month that they can focus on training and learning, which I think is very important. And also, it needs to be supported from leadership, and not just senior leadership, but also the functional managers who have to want to buy into it. And by buy into it, not that leaders need to take every single class that's out there at all, but they want to, I think that they should recognize and reward their team members who are out there and trying to learn and grow. And then it also comes down to not just formal training, but setting up space and areas where employees can try things. You talk a lot about intuition. And in our organization, and some of the customers we work with, I always say to new hires, if you come in and you're on a railroad track and all you want to do is everything with blinders, then that's not going to work. I want you to take chances and try. Go with your gut feeling sometimes, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And even in some instances, let's laugh and joke about making mistakes. And getting back to the Learning Factory, what can you learn from that? What can you learn from that and do differently next time? And again, I think some of that starts with leadership. If you're a type of leader who's humble and not afraid to be vulnerable to a degree and say and share with your team, I tried this, it didn't go well. Here's what I learned from, or maybe even, can you help me out? I think that's a much more collaborative environment. And you start building a culture that's more scalable and becomes a learning factory, because people they're not afraid to try things. They're going to go out there, do their best, make mistakes, learn from it, better teamwork, all the above.
So as I understand it, I love the fact, I want to get back to this idea about a LTO. So let me put that on a shelf for a second. I know that some of this is subject to the industry that we're in. If we are, say, for example, I don't know, like a marketing company where trial and error, or what you might call an agile approach to being able to develop things, makes a lot of sense. Or your software company, makes a lot of sense to do that. But if you are, say, Honeywell, or you're into a Six Sigma and it's all about reducing errors, or you're building a big, I don't know, a fuselage for a plane, or you're a surgeon and you're getting in there and you're doing heart surgery, errors are not a good thing. We want to reduce that as much as possible. So failure, in some ways, based on the industry, may not be an option, but in others, we could certainly celebrate it. I mean, so how do you help organizations determine where you can allow for failure in sometimes industries where failure could be life or death?
Well, that's a great point. Obviously, you can't celebrate failure if you're a heart surgeon and you mess up and your patient dies, right? That's awful. I think sometimes, to answer your question about where you can celebrate failure and where failure is okay versus times it's not, is one of the terms that I've kind of coined is purposeful awfulizing. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're going to make a big decision, or you're going to take a chance, or you're going to do something. Fast forward, think about a year from now. What is the worst outcome that could possibly happen? And if that worst case outcome is not something you could live with, right? If it's you're making a purchase of a new house and it makes you go bankrupt, or you acquire a company and that doesn't go well, if it's something you can't live with, then you need to recalibrate and look at the decisions that you're making and maybe take it a step back or go in a different direction. I mean, even with, you mentioned marketing and SaaS companies, you still need to do that in a sandbox. You can't test out emails that are going to go out to 50,000 people and just be a complete mess. So I think you need to find, like they tell kids, it's better if you're in a park, it's better to fall from a lower branch of a tree or a playground than from the top one, right? So maybe try it in small little increments. But obviously, there's different scenarios for different organizations. And in some cases, failure is not an option at all.
Yeah. So back to this idea about LTO, learning time off. I think there was once a TED talk I saw by a guy named Dan Pink. He was talking about motivation, and he was quoting, this was a long time ago.
He's great.
He was so good. This was a fantastic talk if anybody wants to go see that. But he was referencing, which is now probably 20 years ago, how certain big organizations like Google and others, Atlassian, I think he was quoting about what was called 20% time, where you would go off and you would take 20% of your time and you go create something and then you maybe come back and present it. In a way, it sort of sounds a little bit like these learning time off scenarios that you just created. When you work with a company and you propose this LTO, much like PTO, we have a certain percentage of our time that we can say, hey, this is my personal time. What percentage of time is appropriate for LTO?
Good question. And yeah, I read that study on Google where they gave 20% of their time to their team to go out, get creative, think about things, come up with ideas.
Yeah.
I think every organization is different because don't get me wrong, learning is important. It's very important, especially for the younger generations who are demanding professional growth opportunities. On the other hand, so is execution. Organizations can't succeed and survive if there isn't some type of execution. So getting back to your question around how much time is appropriate, we try to recommend to our customers that maybe give everybody 2 to 3 hours every other week. So for instance, to be able to take a course, and it's not just taking courses. Maybe it's some learning opportunities in the flow where you partner up with a mentor or you do cross-functional. If you're in accounting and you go work with the sales team, but you follow them along as like a shadow or whatever, right? So there's different ways and different modules. Of course, as you know, you've been in this a long time, just like me. So it's many different ways that people can get learning across. But if you can give them at least 2 to 3 hours every couple of weeks, then I think that is at least baseline. You get these organizations that we tend to work with sometimes, and they're not a great fit as a client because they'll say, hey, you know what? We're having a corporate retreat and we want to dedicate 90 minutes for you to come in and teach us emotional intelligence, storytelling, and just try to cram everything in at one time. And that's all they do for the year. And quite frankly, Dean, we pretty much walk away from the opportunity because it's not going to produce any behavior change or outcomes. We want to work with organizations we call who want to be learn it all cultures that believe and back in that learning needs to be embedded in the culture of the organization, which requires both leadership and functional managers to be okay with providing time and the resources necessary for their team to learn and grow.
I like this. So I remember many years ago, we were working with Honeywell and we did some training with them. And I was talking to one of the managers and I said, so tell me about the whole background around your learning and development process. And he goes, well, we got 40 hours a year that we are instructed to go and get some sort of learning. And then when we're done with that 40 hours, we check that box and we can come to our annual review and say, okay, we got 40 hours of learning, we're done. And it said, okay, so it's basically the number of hours over a period of year. So yes, how is it aligned? Is it sort of like connected to competencies or a certain sort of strategy? He goes, no, it's just whatever we want to learn. So in one way, I thought that was great that they were supporting this learning culture. On the other hand, what I noticed was that it didn't have two things. One, sort of follow through, because people forget things within 80% of a month after they leave a training and development program.
If not more.
So, if not more, right? And so the reinforcement, the mother of all skill, that practice is so important. But then the other piece is, how is it aligned? How does it connect to something that moves us all forward, moves the organization forward towards our future goals? And so when you help organizations create these learning factories, how do you structure it in such a way that it is scalable, it does have reinforcement, and it is somehow aligned to larger strategies?
We've actually worked with some organizations very similar to what you mentioned, where they give them X amount of hours and then they could just do whatever they want and check the box. And there was really no strategy or game plan around it. I think it depends on whatever size organization you're working with. But a lot of times what we'll say, is start off with doing a quick assessment of some of the team members that you have. And I don't recommend really starting with the C-level, because the C-level, they have their vision and their clear goals as far as what they want to have accomplished. What we recommend is, why don't you have a conversation with maybe 10 or 15 of the most recent hires who've come on board and ask them, what skills and tools are you going to need to thrive in our organization as people who are just coming in, and kind of get an assessment there of what it looks like, and then talk to the leadership, and then combine both of those, saying, okay, this is what your vision and your goal, your purpose is, and then here's what these people are saying they're needing, and then to kind of merge those two and develop. And what we try to do is we try to develop training programs, learning programs around that. With us, we try to start with all our customers on a baseline of we believe communication is what we call an anchor strength. And so for us, we want them to go through, we have them like stacks or like a cohort. And there's the three key skills are really listening, collaboration, and the third one, and just communicate with confidence. So in a perfect world, if a company, if we get access to everybody in an organization and really bought in, that's where we start with everybody, and we get the baseline of the communication stack done, and then we kind of move in towards what is aligned with the company's values and goals, along with where that intersects with the employees as far as what they see as important. Because at the end of the day, I think you got to get buy-in from the individuals to want to be motivated to develop and themselves, and there's got to be a kind of a purpose for them to understand, why am I being voluntold maybe to attend this training? How is this going to help me personally, which is what everybody cares about, but how is it also going to impact positively the organization I work for? And if you could do both of those, I think you're going to have a motivated learner and a motivated team.
So you're definitely aligning the learning outcomes to sort of the overall greater purpose of the organization, goals, and so forth. I guess my feeling is that it's important for leaders to model the learning. I sometimes have seen organizations where they create some sort of an event or series of trainings, and so the senior leaders don't participate. It's for those people who sort of need it, but it doesn't really bode well, because they're thinking like, wait a minute, why aren't our leaders here? They should be in here elbow to elbow with us. Do you agree, or do you think that there's some training programs where it can just simply be at the mid-level manager level and we don't need to have seniors leader participate?
No, I agree 100% that senior leaders need to at least participate to some level. I also think that middle managers are the ones who need the most help, because they're tied. Yeah. They're stretched between senior and they're in the toughest position. One of the things that we speak to and talk about a lot with our customers is the value of shared learning experiences. And that is getting together as a team, either small group coaching or, in the trainings that we do, and have senior leaders involved and participating in it. And this is either virtual or in person. I've had so many. I was talking to a CFO of a pretty decent sized nonprofit the other day, and he was saying, like, Learnit kept us going over COVID because it was a way to stay connected. And it was a way, when the senior leaders were participating, it was a way for the individual contributors to get access to the senior leaders. And so I think they should be involved. A great example that I just experienced, one of our big clients is the Atlanta Braves, which is fun for me, considering I was a baseball player and drafted by the Braves, but not the players, but the sales team and ticket sales team and the operations. I went out there to Truist Field and I did a little talk on my book and everything, but then we got together with all levels of the senior leaders and individual contributors, and we just did an exercise, and it was awesome to see everybody in groups of 4 just bonding and talking and getting to know each other better, which I think, going back to all this learning factory, it helps build trust and even influence within an organization when you can work together like that. So yeah, I've seen it too, where senior leaders don't want anything to do with the training or the learning, and I think that that's probably an example of how the organization is overall, right?
Yeah.
So you got to lead by example.
You bring up a great point about trust. That a foundation of trust creates a foundation of learning. If you can't really create a learning organization, I'm assuming you agree with this, without there being a fair amount of trust within the organization to do that. Somehow they're married to each other. I
Goes
wanted to
without
ask,
saying.
yeah. So it seems like kind of intuitive there, but the idea about failure, which you talked about earlier, as a way to allow that to be okay, that failure is not a four-letter word. Connect that and learning organizations to another topic that I know you're passionate about, which is this whole imposter syndrome that leaders sometimes have. I just sort of dawned on me as you were talking, Damon, that there's a connection between a person who has an imposter syndrome and an organization that doesn't support learning. And I think maybe you could help knit it together for all of us, the relationship between an imposter syndrome situation and the lack of learning that takes place.
Well, when I was preparing to come on your show, I was listening to your TED Talk, and and you were mentioning, you're talking about how people sometimes don't trust their intuition and don't make decisions based on their intuition. And the first thing that connected with me right there is imposter syndrome. Maybe it's because they're feeling this way, but they don't believe in themselves enough, or maybe they're not good enough to take that chance. And I was, connecting that with it within an organization and making decisions or bold decisions. And I don't think it's just leaders that have imposter syndrome. I mean, my definition of leader to begin with is we're all leaders. We all, and leadership starts with self-leadership and, raising your hand saying, okay, I'm going to take accountability and I'm going to do this. So I think we all deal with imposter syndrome at some point in our life. And if you don't, then you're either a sociopath or you're just lying. And so over the years, whether playing baseball or in my professional career, I've kind of worked out a framework that I use to overcome imposter syndrome that can help with learning too, learning is a key part of it. First, you want to identify what you're worried about. So let's say it's doing a big presentation, or maybe you're just promoted into leading a team and you're thinking to yourself, I can't believe I was just promoted. I don't even know if I'm good enough to do this. I've had so many people that I've kind of mentored or coaches who said, I just got promoted into this position. I don't know if I can handle it. And I would say, for one, look, these people believe in you, so you need to believe in yourself and be able to do it. But the framework really is 3 steps. Number 1, you got to put in the effort. There's no hacks, no shortcuts. I'm not saying you need to work 10 to 14 hours a day, but you need to put in the effort, roll up your sleeves. Number 2 is purposeful, deliberate practice. You need to go in and you need to practice. If you're afraid, and you got to give a big presentation, you got to practice it over and over and over, and ask for feedback. Get feedback, invite feedback, and then step number 3 is, once you put in the work and you've done the deliberate practice, this is where the learning comes in. Dean, I look at it like you just have to. It's time to stop thinking about your technique or whatever it is you're going into, or this new role, and you just need to let go and learn. Give it your best shot. Do your best. And if you succeed, fantastic. But if you fail, as long as you're not a surgeon again, we're talking about, but if you fail, then don't beat yourself up so much over it. I think a lot of people are afraid to fail because they're going to get embarrassed or how they look in front of other people. Well, most people don't really care. They'll think about you for a second or two, but give it your best shot and learn and let go. Think about what you could do differently next time, take the learning lessons, and then learn to grow and evolve. And that's kind of where I think that that imposter syndrome intersects with learning, is if you put yourself in a position where you're going to do the work, deliberate practice, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to succeed. And in the worst case scenario, it doesn't go well, it's still learning opportunities for you.
So we didn't really start with this, and maybe I should have, but you had a career, you had a passion for baseball. Tell us about what you learned in that period of your life and how it got you to running a company around helping other organizations being learning organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story short. I grew up playing all different sports. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I realized that if I had an opportunity to play past high school, it was baseball. I was a high school All-American, and then I was drafted by the Atlanta Braves, this is going way back to 1990. And that was like my first real, do I go to minor leagues or do I go the college route? I went to the college route. This is the first thing I learned about leadership. I went to college route because I was playing for a coach at Pepperdine named Andy Lopez, who had a very clear vision and a purpose for our team. And it was just crystal clear. It wasn't, and it was, we're going to win the College World Series, which was a moonshot vision for a small D1 school like that. But he had everybody bought in is all one direction. Unfortunately, I got hurt. I dealt with imposter syndrome a lot. I ended up leaving, and they won the World Series that year. So what a great lesson. Then I bounced around from a junior college, and I ended up, we talked about this before, at Arizona State.
Yeah.
And I played for a legendary coach by the name of Jim Brock. And what I've learned, almost everything I learned to learn it that I have is through what I've learned playing through 3 Hall of Fame baseball coaches. You learn a lot about discipline, communication, collaboration, and you also, I think I've learned, doesn't matter who it is, he's actually a big league manager right now, what not to do as a leader. You can learn things to avoid as a leader. So I took all of what I've learned. I went, Learnit was just starting. My dad was a big real estate guy. Talk about somebody who went with their intuition. I mean, he just went for it. And we started this company called Learnit. I got in on the ground floor as a receptionist. Fast forward 6 years, taught classes, did sales. And then never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I would be in the learning and development world based off my previous life in baseball. But here I am all these years later. And I think that we've been able to be successful because I've been able to build a fantastic team, the type of learning culture that and learning factory, Dean, that we have been speaking about. And that's because Learnit is a small, gritty organization in the heart of San Francisco. So the competition for talent, whether it's Salesforce, Google, it's hard. So, I can't compete paying people the way they did, the compensation the way they did. But what I would always do is I would hire for potential over experience. I'd bring in these people who had, the right attitude and aptitude and give them opportunities that they wouldn't get anywhere else by giving them the tools to learn, access to me and other leaders we had at Learnit. And some people would stay a couple of years. Some people would stay 15, 20 years. But it became almost like a flywheel. Learnit became known for the people getting out of school. This is the place to go to kind of cut your teeth in the business world, and it's a great learning opportunity. And ever since, we call them the Learnit alumni. They're always contacting us and saying, "Hey, this person would be a good fit for your culture. This person would be a good fit for your environment." And that's one of the things I think for any of your listeners out there is if you can help develop the type of culture where people can learn and grow. And then if people leave, and they do it the right way, keep a strong relationship with them because they get to know what your culture's like, and they can always refer people who they think would be a great fit for your culture. So that's
they're ambassadors for your company. I remember once in a sales force that we were training or something we were involved in, but that, when good experience happens with a person and a company, they may tell a few people about it, but if it's a bad experience, they tell like 17 people in the first 2 weeks. So, your point's well taken that the people that move out of your company and go on to do other things are out there, whether you know it or not, saying things about you, your company, your culture, how well you do things, how well you don't do things. And if it's a bad experience, they're probably going to be a lot more verbose than those who think that you do pretty well.
Absolutely.
So it's a great point. So if you were to nail all this down, there's so many different great things we talked about here. We talked about intuition as being sort of a function of learning. We talked about imposter syndrome, overcoming that to create learning environments. I love the idea about LTO, this whole learning time off. I think that was brilliant. And the whole concept in general around creating learning environments. But is there like a quintessential one or two most important leadership traits that you've identified or you keep seeing, whether it be back in your days in baseball, of what worked or didn't work, or in your organization now, that if you had to choose one, you're on the desert island and someone says, you got to choose just one or two leadership traits that you think are the most important, how would you answer that?
Well, I have 4, but is that too many?
Okay, we can do 4.
Okay. So to me, and all these things that we talked about, that we brought up, again, I think it bubbles up to leadership. And to build a learning culture, a learn it all culture, I feel like the 4 traits that great leaders need to have are humility, curiosity, integrity, and courage. Courage, I'm not saying, you go out on a battlefield in war. That's a different level of courage. I'm saying courage, having the guts to stick your neck out there and try something, right? To be out there and try and, whether you fail or succeed. Humility is important to being like, hey, I don't have it all figured out, right? Great leaders, I believe, are learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. Know-it-alls have no humility. They've got it all figured out, right? So I think you got to have courage to try things and fail. You got to be humble enough to realize that you don't know it all. So you need to surround yourself with a great team. Integrity, I think, is, should be self-explanatory, though it's not. Do the right thing. That's one thing I learned in baseball. Do the right thing and do it all the time. There's no excuse for that. And then, and I think this plays a lot into, again, thinking about intuition, is curiosity. I think great leaders stay curious and are always looking to listen deeply to people on their team, and also have that knack to figure out how there's got to be better ways to do things. I mean, like right now, I'm kind of obsessed with all this AI stuff, because being curious about it, because I think if you don't, my intuition tells me that if you're not a power user at AI, even not for a non-technical guy like me, you're going to get crushed eventually. So you have to be curious and open-minded with flexible thinking about how you can go about this. Because I don't want my organization to be leapfrog because we're not curious about what's possible out there.
I found this quote. I don't know where it came from, but we put it on promotional slide decks, when we're out giving pitches to companies. And it says, if you're not learning faster than your competition, they will overcome you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so true. That. I mean, we have to be in the business of learning. Otherwise, eventually, whether it be AI or some other technology, you can't stay the same. You're either growing, you're either declining. You're probably not staying the same for very long. And I really like. Thanks for bringing back up the topic about intuition. There was a 3-part model that I created as a result of thinking about this topic around intuition, and it was presence, purpose, and play as being some foundational pieces around how do you really then become more intuitive, right? And so as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that you could almost apply some of that to a learning culture as well. And somebody once asked me recently on a podcast, I said, what's the most important leadership trait? And I always thought just sort of a default answer was sort of like self-awareness, right? Because it has to start with yourself.
Very important.
And, and there's tremendous a lot of, like that makes sense. You can't grow others until you grow yourself. And self-awareness is sort of your laboratory in which to do that. But lately I've begun to wonder that maybe it's something before self-awareness. It's sort of like what's upstream of self-awareness. And as I thought about it, I think it's being present, going back to presence, purpose, and play. We have to be focused. We have to be here in the now in order for us to have the availability for learning, for curiosity, for humility, for courage, for integrity. We have to have a place for it. And if we are focused on the past and regurgitating that and worrying about it, or if we're concerned about something that hasn't happened in the future, how can we be learning when we're not here to be present for learning? So I think that somehow you've been able to help me tie all this back to that presence, purpose, and play as also being a foundational framework for learning as well.
I like those 3. For me, meditating for 10 minutes a day for 10 days is very tough. Yes. I mean, to figure it out. But I think exactly what you said, you can't be curious if and you can't, I mean, you can't listen deeply if you're not present, and you're not being curious. And it's so hard, in this world we live in with so much chaos and so much noise and so much stuff happening all over the place that that I think being present and focusing and being curious and learning is huge. And I really like the third P, play. And again, I know, I just keep saying this again. Of course, there's a tag on it, whether you're a surgeon and everything else, but giving people the opportunity to play and try to do things. One thing I'll say about that is, as a sales leader, a lot of times you go in with a new rep and that you go on a sales call, and your intuition is to jump in and and take over the call because maybe the call won't go well. But my recommendation is let them play it out. Let them see how they do, because that is the learning factory part of it, Dean. It's, I mean, people aren't going to learn if you jump in and you do the work for them. But even if it doesn't go that well, you could meet with them afterwards. You could say, what do you think went well? Let's try this again. But without the play, I don't think that you're going to be able to evolve as in your professional career, in your growth.
I had another guy on this podcast, it was about a month ago, and we were talking about scaling a business. And so this is sort of like for those people out there who are leaders in businesses or own a business and so forth. And he said, one of the biggest problems that people who own a business have is being able to delegate and to let go and to allow others to really show up and take over because they know it so well. And they've become such subject matter experts in some faction of their business that they can constantly see where others are failing against their own very high standards. And he said something I thought was so brilliant. He said, to find somebody who can do it as well as you is probably a unicorn. It's not going to happen. But imagine 10 people doing 70% as well as what you do. Now you have 700% more value that you're being able to create for your customers than you would have had you not delegated and given up this need for perfection. So I thought, that's pretty good. I got to remember that as I struggle in my own way to let go of things in our company. So that was a good suggestion.
I mean, one thing I'll say about that is that's not a good suggestion. That's a great suggestion. We could sit here for 30 minutes and talk about this conversation. It's I recommend a lot of times to people I know who get offered to be promoted. Let's use sales again. Like a top performing individual contributor into becoming a sales leadership, had a conversation with somebody 6 months ago. He's like, Damon, I'm super excited. This is going to be great for my resume and everything. My boss, I want to, top performing individual contributor sales into leadership. And I told the guy, don't do it. You're not a fit. You're not a fit for it. Just knowing that their skill set, because going into leadership is a completely different type of skill set than an individual contributor. And sometimes, I think organizations need to have a better path, whether you're an engineer or in sales, of maybe promotions on a technical side, other than just always moving into the leadership role. Because sometimes high performers are unicorns where they can make everybody 60, 70% better. But if you get somebody like my friend that I know into this role who won't delegate anything, takes over all the conversations, that sales team's never going to scale. They're not going to learn anything, right? So I think as a leader, one of the first things you should do before you promote somebody is ask that person if they want to be promoted into leadership and why they think it'd be the right fit for them. And listen to make sure it's not just about it's going to look better on my LinkedIn resume or a different comp plan. They have to truly want to, because as you know, it's hard. Being a leader is hard. And so you just kind of want to make sure, and if they have the right reasons, if they don't have the skill set, they can come to a guy like you, they can come to a place like Learnit, and they can evolve those skills. But if they're a know-it-all and they got it all figured out, then you're not going to be able to help them. And instead of making each member on that team 70% better, you're going to push everybody down, and you're probably going to lose great talent.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Damon. Like, I think there's sort of a unspoken expectation that when a person becomes a member of our team, that they should at some point become leaders. Succession planning. Who is your next person in line? There's almost that unspoken rule that says you all need to be leaders at some point. And your point's well taken. Maybe that isn't their highest and best use. Maybe we have to take a look at what's really needed for them in the company and not make a stigma on it if they don't necessarily grow up the corporate ladder. Like,
exactly.
I remember people talking to me about I don't want the promotion to the senior vice president. And I said, well, why not? It's the next thing up. And he goes, because I'm happy doing what I'm doing here. Like, why? I mean, I get to spend some time with my family. I enjoy the work. My dad, rest his soul, he had so many opportunities to become a publisher and editor of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. He was a lifelong investigative kind of Bill Moyers type, Dan Rather reporter. He loved doing that. And he kept getting all these offers. Why don't you, be an editor? Why don't you be the publisher? He says, no, I want to stay where I am because I love the work. And I really respected that. And I think we as leaders need to be able to look at the person versus the expectation of everyone's got to be a leader.
I think you're 100% right. You got to be curious and ask those questions and find out. But also, I think it's the old way of thinking that the expectations is always to go in that direction. I'm a big believer that you really got to focus on people's strengths, and not everybody's strengths align the same way. And great teams, you need diverse strengths at different things. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who are moved into leadership roles who shouldn't be because of that.
And again, conversely, I think the final thought I'll throw at this kind of vein of conversation is I think we sometimes apply the same tool for everybody and thinking that because it worked for somebody, this training program, what have you, is going to work for everybody else. And people learn differently. They have different styles. We can't just apply the same tool and expect we're going to get the same result. There's this wonderful team member that we have that we occasionally work with, and she had a dissertation that she did that had to do with being able to measure whether or not a person actually was ripe for coaching or whether they were more ripe for therapy. It's like, duh. Well, coaches know that, wait a minute, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? Must be me. I'm not doing well. Well, maybe it's because we're providing the wrong tool. Yeah. Maybe what they need is to help them sort of work on some other things, which a therapist is more apt to do versus let's throw them into a coaching conversation. And it's the same example of we sometimes think coaching is great for everybody. No, it's not. Sometimes we need a therapist. Sometimes we need something else, right?
Yep. I agree with you. And it's kind of like two things there. One is sometimes you're solving for the wrong problem, right? You're trying to solve the wrong problem. And two, it's like at Learnit, we don't do coaching. We do training. And we partner with a lot of coaches on programs. And sometimes my team members are like, is that going to cannibalize our business? And I said, no, because coaching isn't for everybody. Coaching, it takes a certain type of commitment, right? You have to be very committed and involved for it to be able to be successful. And I think that everybody learns differently. Some people like on demand. Some people I personally like coaching. I'd rather have my specific topics addressed that I can find somebody that I believe in, who believes in me, and tailor it that way instead of watching an online video or anything. I mean, I like participating in classes because you're with the rest of your team. But I think knowing what type of learning helps the individual the most, because everybody, like you mentioned, is different. So I like that point you brought up.
But Dan, we could talk for forever, man. It's just we're in the same I think wavelength, and I really enjoyed this conversation. But
me too.
How can people get to know you better, follow your work? Tell us about whatever you've written in terms of books, so that at least they have a final thought from you about how they can connect to you.
Sure. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Damon Lembi, and that's really the best way. My book, The Learn It All Leader, is on Amazon, and you can check that out. But connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Love to talk to you sometime.
Damon, it's been great to talk to you, my friend. It's really been a pleasure. And if you ever get up to Bend, let me know.
I'm going to. And same thing for you if you come to Sausalito.
Definitely. We'll make it happen.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, Go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadovation.